In the dust-swept plains of Thunder Valley, Montana, legends aren't born. They're made through grit, gunpowder, and carefully guarded secrets. Sarah Mitchell, at 24, knows more about keeping secrets than most. Her delicate features and flower-dusted apron tell one story. The collection of golden buckles and shooting trophies hidden in her grandfather's old chest tell another. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. To the folks of Thunder Valley, she's just another struggling rancher's daughter, trying to keep her family's modest spread alive after her grandfather's passing. They see her at the general store bargaining for better prices on feed. They wave as she delivers fresh eggs to the church socials. What they don't see is the reason why empty whiskey bottles along the fence line have neat holes drilled through. Their centers, or why wild coyotes mysteriously avoid the Mitchell property. When the morning sun paints the Montana sky in shades of amber, Sarah's already awake, her morning routine as precise as her aim. The chickens need feeding, the horses want tending, and her grandfather's prized Winchester Model 1876 needs its daily cleaning. The rifle, mounted above the stone fireplace, gleams like a promise in the dawn light. Few people remember that just 5 years ago, a masked rider dominated the Western Rodeo circuit, winning every mounted shooting competition from Denver to Sacramento. They called the mysterious champion the Thunder Valley Ghost. A rider who could hit targets at full gallop with supernatural accuracy, then vanish before anyone could unmask the champion. Only Sheriff Tom Bradley knows why the ghost disappeared the same month Sarah's grandfather fell ill. "Your secret's safe with me, girl," he'd said back then, helping her store away the trophies. "Though it's a crying shame. Best mounted shooter I've ever seen, man or woman." This morning, like every morning, Sarah checks the headlines in the week-old newspaper Bradley brings by. Reports of the Red Rock Raiders moving north catch her eye. The notorious gang has been hitting isolated ranches using speed and superior numbers to overwhelm their victims. 3 dead in Wyoming already. The Raiders have a reputation for being more than just thieves. They're showmen, forcing their victims to participate in twisted shooting contests before taking everything they own. Sarah's fingers brush against her grandfather's rifle as she reads. His voice echoes in her memory. "Remember, little Storm, sometimes the best defense is letting them think they've got the upper hand." A sound draws her attention. Hoofbeats approaching multiple riders. Through her window, she spots 5 horses crossing the creek that marks her property line. Their riders sit tall, in well-maintained saddles, rifles gleaming in the morning light, not the usual dusty drifters who occasionally pass through Thunder Valley. Sarah quickly adjusts her apron, missing her honey-brown hair slightly. The young woman who steps onto her porch bears little resemblance to the phantom champion whose shooting prowess became a circuit legend. Instead, she presents the perfect picture of a nervous farm girl, though her keen eyes have already counted weapons, noted firing positions, and marked the leader, a flamboyant man wearing a bright red bandana and silver-studded gun belt. The Red Rock Raiders have arrived in Thunder Valley, and they have no idea they're about to meet the ghost. "Morning, miss," the leader calls out, reining his horse to a stop. "Mighty fine spread you got here. Bit remote, though. Must be hard managing all alone." His smile doesn't reach his eyes. Sarah clutches her egg basket closer, letting her hands tremble just enough to be noticed. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The leader removes his hat, revealing a shock of silver-streaked black hair. "Name's Jackson. Read, miss. My friends and I are professional shooting enthusiasts. Heard tell this valley used to be home to quite the marksman. Old man Mitchell, if I recall." Reed dismounts, spurs jingling against the packed earth. "Now see, that's interesting, because we heard something different. Heard the old man's collection was intact when he died, including that fancy exhibition rifle the Rodeo Association gave. His hand drifts toward his holstered revolver. Seems to me a young lady living alone might feel safer with some protection. For a fair price, of course. Sarah's surprised intake of breath isn't entirely feigned. You knew my grandfather? Reed's laugh is as sharp as a rattler's warning. Knew him? Man was famous for teaching trick shooting at rodeos before he retired. Rumor has it he had quite the collection of championship prizes. Gold buckles, silver trophies, items of considerable value to collectors like myself. The other raiders have spread out in a loose circle around her porch. Sarah counts 5 total, marking their positions while maintaining her facade of nervous innocence. She recognizes their pattern from the newspaper reports, the same formation they used at the Anderson Ranch in Wyoming before the shooting started. I'm afraid you've wasted your time, Sarah says, her voice carefully uncertain. The army took all Grandpa's trophies when he passed. Regulations, they said. It's a lie, of course. The trophies are still hidden away, along with enough ammunition. To hold off a small army, her grandfather always believed in being prepared. Sarah takes a small step back, playing her role. I really couldn't. Boss! One of the other raiders, barely more than a boy with sun-bleached hair, calls out. Found fresh targets set up behind the barn. Someone's been practicing. Reed's expression hardens. That right? Been keeping up the family tradition, have you, girl? Just for the coyotes, Sarah stammers, mind racing ahead like a champion barrel racer seeing the course. Grandpa insisted I learn the basics, but I'm hardly any good. Can't hit much beyond 10 paces, truth be told. The gang leader studies her. For a long moment, then smiles a predator's smile. Tell you what, why don't you show us? He pulls a playing card from his vest pocket. The Queen of Hearts. Standard carnival game. Hit it at 20 paces and we'll ride on. No trouble. His voice drops an octave. Miss, and well, let's just say we'll need to discuss proper compensation for our wasted time. Women alone in these parts need protection. After all, Sarah lets her lower lip tremble. I really couldn't. Oh, but I insist. Reed's hand now rests openly on his gun. Consider it a friendly competition, in memory of your grandfather. Sarah glances at the rifle above the fireplace, remembering countless dawn practice sessions with her grandfather. His voice whispers in her memory, "Patience, little storm. The best shots aren't about speed, they're about timing." I'll need a rifle, she says, voice deliberately uncertain. Grandpa's is inside, above the fireplace. Reed nods to the young raider. Escort the lady, Billy. Make sure she doesn't try anything foolish. As Sarah leads Billy into the house, she notices details her grandfather taught her to look for. How the boy's gun belt rides too high, how his eyes dart nervously around the room instead of maintaining focus. Rookie mistakes her grandfather would say, get men killed in real shootouts. The Winchester rifle gleams above the fireplace, exactly where it's hung since her grandfather's passing. Sarah reaches for it with deliberate awkwardness, making a show of nearly dropping it. Billy steps forward to help, just as she'd anticipated. Careful. There, miss, he says, taking the rifle. That's a mighty fine weapon. It's heavier than I remember, Sarah murmurs, letting him examine it while she secretly palms a few custom rounds from the hidden compartment beneath the side table. Rounds she and her grandfather had crafted together, perfectly weighted for trick shots that had made the Thunder Valley Ghost a legend. This is the exhibition model, isn't it? Billy asks, running his fingers along the engraved barrel. Heard the Rodeo Association only made 3 of these. Grandpa was very proud of it, Sarah says softly, slipping the rounds into her apron pocket. Used to say a rifle like this was more than just a weapon. It was a responsibility. Something flickers in Billy's young face, respect perhaps, or memory. My pa loved the rodeos, used to take me before the fever. He trails off, then seems to remember his role. His expression hardens. Come on, boss is waiting. Outside, Reed and his men have arranged themselves in a loose semicircle. The Queen of Hearts flutters on a fence post exactly 20 paces away. An insultingly easy shot. Sarah's grandfather had her hitting playing cards at 4 times that distance before she turned 15. "Remember," Reed calls out, "hit the card and we ride on. Miss..." His hand pats his revolver meaningfully. "Well, let's just say we'll need to make other arrangements." Sarah makes a show of fumbling with the rifle, deliberately holding it wrong. Stock not quite seated, stance slightly off. She can feel her grandfather's voice in her memory, correcting her form as he had thousands of times. "Breathe, little. Storm, the rifle's just an extension of your eye." She squeezes the trigger. The shot goes wide, splintering the fence post 6 inches to the right of the card. Laughter erupts from the raiders. "Looks like you'll be needing that protection after all, girl," Reed says, starting forward. "Now about our arrangement." "Wait!" Sarah calls quickly. "Grandpa always said. He said I should get 3 shots for practice, please." She lets her eyes fill with tears. Reed pauses, then spreads his arms magnanimously. "Well, boys, what do you say? Should we give the lady a sporting chance?" The raiders grin and nod, clearly enjoying the show. Only Billy looks uncomfortable, still holding the rifle case he'd carried from the house. Sarah takes her second shot. This one hits the fence post on the left side of the card, closer, but still a clear miss. She hears more derisive comments, sees the raiders relaxing even further. Their hands have drifted away from their weapons. After all, what threat could... "This clumsy farm girl pose? Last chance, girl," Reed calls out. "Better make it count." Sarah takes a deep breath, centers herself, and remembers her grandfather's most important lesson. Sometimes, little Storm, the best shot is the one they never see coming. In one fluid motion, she shifts her stance, feet planted perfectly, rifle tucked tight against her shoulder, cheek welded to the stock. Before the raiders can register the change, she squeezes the trigger. The Queen of Hearts doesn't just fall. It splits perfectly in half, the pieces fluttering in the morning breeze. The morning air crackles with tension as the shredded pieces of the playing card drift to the ground. For 3 heartbeats, no. One moves, then Reed's hand flashes toward his revolver. "I wouldn't," Sarah says, her voice transformed. Gone is the trembling farm girl, replaced by something harder, forged from countless hours in the rodeo ring. "I can put a bullet through your gun hand before you clear leather, and unlike that playing card, I won't need 3 tries." The raiders freeze, their confident smirks replaced by uncertainty as they realize their situation. Sarah Mitchell stands before them, transformed, her stance perfect, her aim unwavering, every bit her grandfather's heir. "You played us," Reed says, his face twisted with rage. "This whole time." "Grandpa taught me more than just shooting," Sarah replies, keeping the rifle trained on him, while remaining aware of his men's positions. "He taught me that sometimes the best advantage is the one they give you themselves." Her eyes flicker to the others. "Hands where I can see them, gentlemen. Billy, be a dear and collect their gun belts." The young raider hesitates, looking between Sarah and his boss. In that moment of indecision, one of the other men, a weathered character with a snake tattoo coiling up his neck, makes his move. His hand drops to his holster, but before he can grip his weapon, Sarah's rifle cracks. The man's hat flies off his head, a neat hole punched through its crown. "That was a warning," Sarah says calmly, the rifle already back on Reed. "The next one goes lower. Billy, the gun belts, please." This time Billy moves carefully, collecting weapons from his stunned companions. Sarah notes how he handles the task. Efficiently, with a familiarity that suggests he knows more about proper gun handling than his nervous demeanor implied. "You won't get away with this," Reed growls, though he keeps his hands carefully visible. "You're just one girl. We have friends, allies all through these territories. They'll come looking." "You mean the rest of the Red Rock Raiders?" Sarah's question makes him blink in surprise. "The ones targeting ranches all across Montana, competing in those twisted shooting contests of yours?" She allows herself a small smile at their shocked expressions. Did you think my grandfather only taught me shooting? He was a champion rodeo performer, gentlemen. He taught me to read signs, to spot patterns. I've known you were coming for days. Sheriff Bradley's been watching the valley since yesterday. She continues. This is a calculated bluff. She'd sent word to Bradley about suspicious tracks she'd found, but hadn't received confirmation of his actions yet. Still, she'd learned from her grandfather that confidence was often as powerful as fact. You're bluffing, Reed says, but there's a note of uncertainty in his voice. Am I? Sarah keeps her tone level. The same way I was bluffing about not being able to shoot? She addresses the group again. You men have a choice to make. The smart one would be to surrender peacefully, face the law's judgment for your crimes. The other choice... She leaves the threat unspoken, letting them fill in. The details themselves. You can't watch all of us. Snake Tattoo snarls, his hand twitching toward where his gun should have been. 37, Sarah interrupts. What? 37 consecutive bullseyes at the Montana State Fair trick shooting competition, summer of 22. They thought I was one of the male competitors, of course, had my hair tucked up under a hat and wore my grandfather's old duster. Her eyes lock onto Snake Tattoo's. Would you like to test whether I've improved since then? The story hits them hard. The Montana State Fair competition was legendary in shooting circles. Sarah sees the moment the fight goes out of them, replaced by the dawning realization that they aren't facing some lucky farm girl, but rather a shooter, whose skills might surpass even the famous Thunder Valley Ghost. Your grandfather would be proud, Billy says quietly as he returns with the rope. There's something like admiration in his young face. Grandpa would say I showed off, Sarah replies, a touch of sadness in her voice. He always taught me to avoid confrontation when possible. But he also taught me to finish what others start. She raises her voice. On your knees, gentlemen, hands behind your backs. Billy, start with your boss, with the Red Rock Raiders secured, all except Billy, whom Sarah keeps separate from. The others, she faces a new challenge. Thunder Valley's main settlement is still 5 miles away, and she needs to get word to Sheriff Bradley. She can't risk moving the prisoners alone. Billy, she calls, keeping her rifle trained on the others. Will bring me my grandfather's saddlebags from the barn. The young man moves quickly, eager to prove his cooperation. Sarah has seen something in him, a chance for redemption that reminds her of stories her grandfather used to tell about young riders. He'd helped guide back to the right path. You're making a mistake trusting that boy, Reed says from where he kneels, hands bound behind him. Billy's one of us. Funny thing about trust, Sarah replies, watching Billy disappear into the barn. My grandfather always said it's like a rodeo horse. You have to read its signs, understand its nature. Right now I trust Billy more than I trust you. She keeps her voice steady, though her arms are beginning to tire from holding the rifle. Which isn't saying much. Snake Tattoo spits in the dust. Your grandfather ain't here, girl. All his fancy sayings won't help when... He stops abruptly as Sarah's rifle shifts slightly in his direction. When what? She asks softly. When the rest of our boys come looking, the ones you think Bradley's watching. Sarah allows herself a small smile. Let me share another of my grandfather's sayings. The best surprise is one you plan yourself. Before anyone can respond, a shot rings out from the direction of the valley road. Sarah's rifle snaps toward the sound, but she quickly relaxes as she recognizes the signal. 3 short whistles followed by a long one, her grandfather's old rodeo call. Right on time, she murmurs, then raises her voice. Over here, Sheriff. Sheriff Tom Bradley rides into view, leading 3 deputies and 5 bound prisoners, more members of the Red Rock Raiders. The sheriff's usually pristine mustache is dusty from the ride, but his eyes twinkle with satisfaction as he takes in the scene before him. Well now, Miss Mitchell, he says, dismounting smoothly. Seems you've been busy this morning. He nods to Reed. Jackson Reed. Been wanting to have a word with you about that mess over in Sweetwater County. Sheriff, Sarah acknowledges, finally, allowing her rifle to lower slightly. I see you found their camp just where we thought it would be. Bradley turns to his deputies. Boys, secure these gentlemen with the others. We'll need the wagon from town to transport them all. The story hits them hard. The Montana State Fair competition was legendary in shooting circles. Sarah sees the moment the fight goes out of them, replaced by the dawning realization that they aren't facing some lucky farm girl, but rather a shooter, whose skills might surpass even the famous Thunder Valley Ghost. Your grandfather would be proud, Billy says quietly, as he returns with the rope. There's something like admiration in his young face. Grandpa would say I showed off, Sarah replies, a touch of sadness in her voice. He always taught me to avoid confrontation when possible, but he also taught me to finish what others start. She raises her voice. On your knees, gentlemen, hands behind your backs. Billy, start with your boss. With the Red Rock Raiders secured, all except Billy, whom Sarah keeps separate from the others, she faces a new challenge. Thunder Valley's main settlement is still 5 miles away, and she needs to get word to Sheriff Bradley. She can't risk moving the prisoners alone. Billy, she calls, keeping her rifle trained on the others. Bring me my grandfather's saddlebags from the barn. The young man moves quickly, eager to prove his cooperation. Sarah has seen something in him, a chance for redemption that reminds her of stories her grandfather used to tell about young riders. He'd helped guide back to the right path. You're making a mistake trusting that boy, Reed says, from where he kneels, hands bound behind him. Billy's one of us. Funny thing about trust, Sarah replies, watching Billy disappear into the barn. My grandfather always said it's like a rodeo horse. You have to read its signs, understand its nature. Right now, I trust Billy more than I trust you. She keeps her voice steady, though her arms are beginning to tire from holding the rifle. Which isn't saying much. Snake Tattoo spits in the dust. Your grandfather ain't here, girl. All his fancy sayings won't help when... He stops abruptly as Sarah's rifle shifts slightly in his direction. When what? She asks softly. When the rest of our boys come looking. The ones you think Bradley's watching. Sarah allows herself a small smile. Let me share another of my grandfather's sayings. The best surprise is one you plan yourself. Before anyone can respond, a shot rings out from the direction of the valley road. Sarah's rifle snaps toward the sound, but she quickly relaxes as she recognizes the signal. 3 short whistles followed by a long one, her grandfather's old rodeo. Call. Right on time, she murmurs, then raises her voice. Over here, Sheriff. Sheriff Tom Bradley rides into view, leading 3 deputies and 5 bound prisoners, more members of the Red Rock Raiders. The sheriff's usually pristine mustache is dusty from the ride, but his eyes twinkle with satisfaction as he takes in the scene before him. Well now, Miss Mitchell, he says, dismounting smoothly. Seems you've been busy this morning. He nods to Reed. Jackson Reed. Been wanting to have a word with you about that mess over in Sweetwater County. Sheriff, Sarah acknowledges, finally, allowing her rifle to lower slightly. I see you found their camp just where we thought it would be. Bradley turns to his deputies. Boys, secure these gentlemen with the others. We'll need the wagon from town to transport them all. The best shots are the ones you prepare for, Little Storm. The rest, those are the ones that make legends. As the deputies move to comply, Billy emerges from the barn with the saddlebags. He stops short at seeing the new arrivals, but Sarah gestures him forward. It's all right, Billy. Bring them here. The sheriff raises an eyebrow at her treatment of the young raider, but says nothing. He's known Sarah long enough to trust her judgment. From the saddlebags, Sarah withdraws a packet of papers, carefully detailed maps and notes about the Red Rock Raiders' movements that she'd been compiling for weeks. Their whole operation, she explains, handing the papers to Bradley. Routes, hideouts, caches, everything I could piece together from tracking them and listening to gossip at the rodeos. You've been planning this, Reed says, comprehension dawning on his scarred face. All of it, the frightened farm girl act, the missed shots. The frightened farm girl is what everyone in Thunder Valley expects to see, Sarah replies. It's amazing what people will say around someone they don't consider a threat. She turns back to the sheriff. There's more. They weren't just planning to rob isolated ranches. Show him, Billy. The young man hesitates, then reaches into his vest and withdraws a folded paper. Full plans for hitting 3 ranches at once, he says quietly. Thunder Valley, Silver Creek, and Whispering Pines. We had men placed in each area for weeks, learning patterns, making friends with the ranch hands. Bradley whistles softly as he reviews the plans. This would have been the biggest raid in territory history. He looks at Billy thoughtfully. You're being mighty helpful, son. Billy's been looking for a way out for months, Sarah says before the young man can respond. Haven't you, Billy? That's why you left those tracks by my creek 2 days ago, clear as signposts to anyone who knew how to read them. You wanted to be caught. The young man's shoulders slump in relief at having his secret finally spoken aloud. They killed a rancher in Sweetwater, he says softly. It wasn't supposed to happen. Reed said no killing, but then Snake got trigger-happy and he shakes his head. I tried to leave after that, but they said they'd hunt me down. Nobody's hunting you now, son, Bradley says, but his eyes are on Sarah. Miss Mitchell, I don't suppose you'd be interested in a deputy's badge. Territory could use a shot like you. Sarah shakes her head, smiling. My place is here, Sheriff. The ranch needs me. She pauses, then adds, but if you're looking for new deputies, might I suggest someone who knows the raiders' operations from the inside, someone young enough to learn a better way? Billy's head snaps up, hope warring with disbelief on his face. Snake Tattoo laughs harshly. You're both fools. This ain't one of them dime novel stories where everything works out neat and pretty. Real life ain't like that. No, Sarah agrees, thinking of her grandfather's lessons, of long hours practicing in secret, of years playing a role while keeping her skills sharp. Real life is harder, messier. That's why we need people willing to take chances on doing what's right. But as she watches the deputies leading the raiders away, Sarah can't shake the feeling that this victory, impressive as it is, might be just the beginning. Reed's words about allies and friends echo in her mind. Something tells her that the Red Rock Raiders are just one part of a much larger story, one that might force the Thunder Valley ghost to ride again. She touches her grandfather's rifle, feeling the familiar smoothness of its stock. Whatever comes next, she'll be ready. After all, as her grandfather always said. Reed glances back at her as he's led away, his eyes holding a warning. You've made powerful enemies today, girl. Men who won't take kindly to having their plans disrupted. Men who make the Red Rock Raiders look like children playing at being outlaws. Sarah meets his gaze steadily. Then they'll learn what the Raiders learned today. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the valley isn't who you'd expect. The sun climbs higher over Thunder Valley as Sarah Mitchell stands on her porch, watching. The dust settle in the wake of the departing prisoners. The quiet farm girl, who makes the best apple pies at the church socials, has revealed herself as something else entirely. The question now is, what comes next? Word of Sarah Mitchell's showdown with the Red Rock Raiders spreads through Thunder Valley like wildfire. By sundown, the quiet ranch girl who always brought prize-winning pies to the church socials has become something else entirely in the eyes of the territory. Sarah stands at her kitchen window, watching the sun paint the valley in shades of purple and gold, wondering what her grandfather would think of how things had changed in just one day. The Winchester rifle has returned to its place above the fireplace, but its presence feels different now, less a secret, more a statement. They're calling you the Valley's angel in town, Sheriff Bradley says, accepting a cup of coffee at her kitchen table. He's returned after securing the prisoners in the town jail, bringing news of the territory's reaction, though some of the old-timers are saying they knew all along. Mrs. Henderson swears she saw you practicing tricks behind the barn last spring. Mrs. Henderson needs stronger spectacles, Sarah replied dryly. I haven't practiced behind the barn since winter. She sits across from him, her grandfather's rifle now more symbol than secret. How are the prisoners settling in? Quiet mostly, except for Reed. He's been demanding to speak with territorial authorities, claiming he has information about bigger operations. Bradley strokes his mustache thoughtfully. Billy's been helpful, though. Boy knows more about outlaw operations across 3 territories than most lawmen. Before Sarah can respond, a knock at the door makes her tense, hand instinctively moving toward the rifle. Bradley shakes his head. That'll be Martha, he says. My wife insisted on bringing you a pie. Says it's not right for you to be out here alone now that everyone knows. Sarah opens the door to find not just Martha Bradley, but half the Ladies' Aid Society crowded onto her porch, led by the formidable Mrs. Henderson herself. The older women sweep into her kitchen, bringing with them pies, casseroles, and an overwhelming wave of chatter. Sheriff Bradley makes a tactical retreat, tipping his hat with a sympathetic smile as he slips out. To think, Mrs. Peterson says, arranging her casserole on Sarah's counter. All this time, we've been treating you like a child who needed looking after, when you were really... She trails off, seemingly unsure how to categorize a young woman who could outshoot most men in the territory. I'm still the same person, Sarah says firmly, accepting yet another pie. Nothing's changed except what you know about me. But dear, Mrs. Henderson interjects, everything's changed. Why, just today Mrs. Thompson was saying her James might be interested in courting you. A girl with your talents would make quite a catch for any young rancher looking to start out. Sarah suppresses a sigh. This was exactly what she'd feared. Her carefully maintained privacy crumbling under the weight of public interest. I'm not looking for suitors, Mrs. Henderson. The ranch keeps me busy enough. Nonsense, the older woman declares. A girl your age needs to think about her future. Why, with your skills, you could have your pick of any young man in the territory. She adds with a significant look, though some might be intimidated by a wife who shoots better than they do. The other women titter, but Sarah notices some nodding in agreement. She thinks of her mother's words about a lady's reputation, wondering what Catherine Mitchell would make of all this. Another knock at the door interrupts her thoughts. This time it's Reverend Clark, accompanied by several members of the church board. Miss Mitchell, he says solemnly, we've been discussing the Sunday school position. Sarah had been teaching the younger children on Sundays, a role she'd enjoyed, precisely because it let her be useful while maintaining her quiet reputation. Now she sees in the Reverend's expression that this too might change. Perhaps, Reverend Clark continues, given recent events, it might be more appropriate for you to teach the older boys' class. They could benefit from your expertise in certain areas. Reverend, Sarah starts, but Mrs. Henderson cuts in. Now see here, Reverend Clark. Just because Sarah can handle a rifle doesn't mean she's any less suited to teach the little ones. Why? My own grandmother carried a shotgun during Indian raids, and she was the finest Sunday school teacher in Virginia. As the argument grows, Sarah slips out onto her porch, leaving the voices behind. The evening air is cool, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. She thinks of her grandfather's words about the price of skill, not just in the hours of practice, but in how it changed how others saw you. A movement in the tree line catches her eye. Billy emerges slowly, wearing his new deputy's badge, but looking nervous. Miss Mitchell, he calls softly, holding his hands where she can see them. Sheriff Bradley sent me. There's trouble. Sarah gestures to him inside, noting how he carries himself differently now, straighter, more purposeful. What kind of trouble? 2 men rode into town last night, Billy explains, accepting a cup of coffee with shaking hands. Brothers named Hawkins. They're not like the raiders. They're professionals. Used to ride with the Cross T outfit before it fell apart. He pauses, gathering his thoughts. They're asking questions about you. What kind of questions? About your shooting mostly. Whether the stories are true. Billy's hands steady as he continues. But that's not the worst part. This morning we found this nailed to the jail door. He withdraws a crumpled paper from his vest. The message is crude but clear. Tell the Mitchell girl to watch her back. The Red Rock Raiders were just the beginning. P.S. That exhibition rifle of her grandfather's? It belongs to someone else now. Charming, Sarah says dryly, though her mind is already racing through implications and possibilities. How many men do they have? At least 20 from what I've seen, Billy replies. They're professionals, Miss Mitchell, not like our outfit. These men are killers. All men with guns are killers, Billy, Sarah says, echoing her grandfather. The question is what they kill for. She studies the young deputy. Sheriff Bradley. It knows you came to warn me, Billy nods. He's organizing the townsmen, but he hesitates. But what? Most of them can barely hit a barn door at 10 paces, and the Hawkins brothers, they've got a reputation. They say Luke Hawkins once shot a silver dollar out of the air at 50 yards. Sarah allows herself a small smile. Impressive. Though I notice the story doesn't mention how many tries it took him. She stands, moving to the window to scan the surrounding countryside. Tell me about their patterns. How do they operate? As Billy details what he knows, Sarah listens with the same intensity she'd once applied to her grandfather's lessons. The Hawkins brothers are methodical, he explains. They like to create chaos as a distraction, then strike at their real target. While authorities are occupied elsewhere, they'll try to split the town's defenses, she muses, hit multiple locations at once. Standard strategy for a smaller force against a defended position. She turns back to Billy. How many deputies does the sheriff have now? 4 counting me? Billy's face flushes slightly, though I'm not sure how much help I'll be in a real fight. You'd be surprised, Sarah says, studying him thoughtfully. Sometimes the best fighters are the ones who understand what they're risking. She pauses, considering her next words carefully. What do you know about trick shooting, Billy? Really know, not just what you picked up with the raiders. I'll proceed with part 4, focusing on developing the tension and Sarah's preparation against the Hawkins brothers' threat. My pa taught me some, Billy replies, straightening slightly. Proper stance, breathing, trigger control. I can hit what I aim for most of the time. Good, Sarah says, moving to the fireplace and taking down her grandfather's rifle. Lesson 1. A rifle is just a tool. It's the mind behind it that matters. For the next hour, she drills Billy in the basics, correcting his form, teaching him the small details that separate a good shot from a great one. The young deputy proves an eager student, soaking up knowledge like dry earth in a rainstorm. Sheriff Bradley needs to know about their likely strategies, Sarah says finally, as Billy practices his breathing. But he also needs to understand something else. The Hawkins brothers aren't here just for Reed. Billy lowers the rifle, comprehension dawning. They're here for you. My reputation makes me a threat, Sarah finishes, or an opportunity. Either way, they'll want to prove themselves against the girl who took down the Red Rock Raiders. We should warn the sheriff, Billy says, his young face hardening with determination. Get more men out here to defend the ranch, Sarah shakes her head, a plan already forming. No, we're going to give them exactly what they want, but on our terms. She smiles, and for a moment Billy sees in her expression the same calculating look that had preceded the raiders' capture. Tell me, deputy, how are you frightened? By mid-morning, Sarah's ranch has transformed into a carefully orchestrated stage, every detail arranged with deliberate precision. She learned from her grandfather that the best plans were like well-oiled rifles, complex in their making, but simple in their execution. Remember, she tells Billy as they make final preparations, the Hawkins brothers will be watching. Everything we do needs to sell the story. She adjusts a chair on her porch, positioning it to catch the afternoon. Son, they need to believe I'm scared, overwhelmed by their reputation. Billy nods, his new deputy's badge catching the light. He'd spent the last hour helping her move hay bales and ranch equipment, positioning each piece to provide cover, or channel, movement exactly where Sarah wants it. To untrained eyes, it would look like normal ranch work. To professionals like the Hawkins brothers, it might seem like amateur attempts at fortification. What if they don't take the bait? Billy asks, wiping sweat from his brow. These men aren't like Reed and the others. They won't underestimate you just because you're a woman. No, Sarah agrees, checking sight lines from various positions. They'll underestimate me because they think they know what I can do. She smiles slightly. After all, they've heard the stories. 3 shots to hit a playing card, lucky timing with the Red Rock Raiders. They'll be expecting a farm girl with some natural talent, not Thunder Valley's champion trick shooter, Billy finishes. He'd spent the morning learning just how extensive Sarah's training had been, watching her demonstrate shots that seemed to defy possibility. But won't they be suspicious? All this preparation, that's why you're going to ride into town, Sarah explains, looking worried and asking for help. Tell the sheriff exactly what we discussed. Make sure everyone hears you, especially any strangers hanging around the saloon. You're right. Let me continue part 4 with proper length, 2,500 words. Miss Mitchell is scared, Billy recites. Says she got threatening notes, wants protection, but doesn't trust herself to handle trouble like the Hawkins brothers. You're laying a trail, Billy says admiringly, just like my pa used to do when hunting deer. People see what they expect to see, Sarah says, quoting her grandfather. The trick is to make them expect the wrong thing. She pauses, studying the young deputy. Are you sure about your part in this? It'll be dangerous. Billy straightens, his hand touching his badge. I owe you, Miss Mitchell, not just for giving me a chance, but for showing me there's more than one way to be brave. He manages to grin. Besides, I've gotten pretty good at playing scared today. Sarah nods, satisfied. Good. Now remember, when you ride back with the sheriff's protection, make sure to take the south trail. We need them to think we're focused on defending from that direction. As Billy mounts up, Sarah adds one last detail. A white handkerchief, accidentally dropped near the water trough, where it will flutter nervously in the breeze. A small touch, but one that suggests feminine anxiety she wants the Hawkins brothers to see. Once Billy has ridden off, Sarah begins the next phase of her preparation. She cleans her grandfather's rifle meticulously, but leaves it conspicuously, displayed on the porch, another prop in her performance. The real preparation happens in the root cellar, where she uncovers a hidden cache of weapons her grandfather had maintained. Among them is a specially modified Spencer carbine, a weapon few would expect and even fewer could use effectively. The best shot, she whispers, reciting her grandfather's lesson, is the one they never see coming. As she works, Sarah reflects on how her life has changed in just 2 days. The quiet facade she'd maintained for years had crumbled, replaced by a growing legend that draws dangerous men like moths to flame. Part of her mourns that loss of anonymity, but another part, the part that had always thrilled to her grandfather's lessons, feels oddly liberated. She thinks of Mrs. Henderson and the Ladies' Aid Society, of Reverend Clark and his concerns about Sunday school propriety. Their world of social calls and proper behavior seems very far away now. Yet Sarah knows that the world is worth protecting, even if she can never fully belong to it again. By early afternoon, everything is in place. Sarah sits on her porch, apparently Absorbed in mending, but actually counting riders moving through the distant trees. She's spotted 6 so far, carefully hidden but visible to eyes trained by years of rodeo practice. "Nice and predictable," she murmurs, noting their positions. The Hawkins brothers are professionals, which means they'll follow certain patterns. They'll watch, plan, and wait for darkness. They'll expect her to be nervous, to make mistakes. Most importantly, they'll expect her to think like a farm girl, playing at being a warrior, not a warrior who'd spent years playing at being a farm girl. Through her kitchen window, she spots another rider approaching, Billy returning with Sheriff Bradley and 2 deputies. Their arrival is perfectly timed, just as she'd counted on the Hawkins brothers' scouts witnessing. "Remember," she told Billy earlier, "they need to see the law's protection arriving. Make it obvious, make it look like we're scared and doing everything wrong." The performance that follows would have done credit to any theater troupe. Sheriff Bradley, understanding his role perfectly, makes a show of posting his men in conspicuous positions around the ranch house. Sarah stands on her porch, wringing her hands and jumping at small noises, a convincing portrayal of a woman unused to danger. "They're watching," Billy murmurs as he helps Sarah carry water to the horses. 2 in the North Grove, another by the Old Oak. "They're trying to stay hidden, but my grandfather taught me every hiding spot within a mile of this ranch." Sarah finishes, keeping her voice low and her manner anxious for their audience. "Have you seen the brothers themselves?" "Luke Hawkins was in the saloon when I rode in," Billy reports. "Tall man, expensive clothes, matching revolvers worn low. His brother Matt was watching from the hotel. They're exactly like their reputation." "Cool professional," Sarah nods, noting how Billy's description matches what she'd expected. The Hawkins brothers had survived this long by being methodical, by never underestimating their opponents. That very professionalism would be their undoing. As dusk approaches, Sheriff Bradley makes a show of organizing the defense. He posts deputies at obvious points: the front door, the barn, the water trough, all places that experienced gunmen would expect law enforcement to guard, and all places Sarah has carefully prepared to be ultimately irrelevant. "They'll come tonight," Bradley says loudly for the benefit of any watching ears. "Miss Mitchell, you stay inside where it's safe. We'll handle this." Sarah plays her part, protesting weakly before allowing herself to be convinced. As she steps inside, she catches Billy's eye and gives an almost imperceptible nod. The young deputy immediately begins acting nervous, checking and rechecking his gun with shaking hands. Inside the ranch house, Sarah moves with silent efficiency. She extinguishes lamps in a pattern that suggests a normal evening routine, but leaves one burning near a window, creating a perfect backlit target for anyone watching. Then she slips into the root cellar through a hidden trapdoor beneath the kitchen rug. The cellar had been her grandfather's pride, a carefully constructed bunker with concealed shooting ports disguised as ordinary foundation vents. From here, she can see approaches that their watchers think are blind spots. More importantly, she can move through a series of tunnels her grandfather had built, emerging at key points around the property. "A good scout," she whispers, recalling his lessons, "always has an escape route. A great scout makes sure those routes can work in both directions." As true darkness falls, Sarah watches through one of the ports as shadows move at the edge of her property. The Hawkins brothers' men are good. They move with discipline, maintaining formation even in the dark. She counts 15 altogether, more than Billy had estimated. They've gathered reinforcements. Through another port, she sees Billy pacing nervously on the porch, playing his role perfectly. The young deputy had taken to strategy like a natural, understanding instinctively how to appear both armed and vulnerable. The attack, when it comes, is exactly as Sarah had predicted. A distraction at the front of the house. 2 riders charging past, firing wildly as Sheriff Bradley and his men return fire. Shadows move toward the supposedly unguarded back door. Sarah allows herself a small smile as she hears boots on her back porch. The Hawkins brothers would be there personally, Men of their reputation wouldn't trust others with the main objective. Through the cellar's acoustic design, another of her grandfather's innovations, she can hear their whispered conversation. Girls probably hiding in the bedroom, one voice says. Check there first. Remember, another replies, we need her alive. Her reputation is worth more than Reed's freedom. Sarah's smile widens. They think this is about freeing Jackson Reed. They haven't realized that capturing her had always been their real purpose, proving their dominance by taking down Thunder, Valley's hidden champion. She moves silently through the tunnel to her chosen position. Above, she hears the back door ease open, boot steps moving cautiously across her kitchen floor. Everything is proceeding exactly as planned. The Hawkins brothers move through Sarah's darkened kitchen with the confidence of men who believe they control the situation. Luke Hawkins, the taller of the two, carries matching pearl-handled revolvers, while his brother Matt holds a short-barreled shotgun. Both move with the fluid grace of seasoned professionals. From her hidden position in the cellar's tunnel network, Sarah watches through specially designed viewing ports, narrow holes that her grandfather had drilled and disguised as natural, knots in the floorboards. The brothers' expensive boots pass inches from her face as they sweep the house's main floor. Empty, Matt reports in a whisper, lowering his shotgun slightly. But recently occupied. Coffee pot is still warm. Luke moves to the front window, carefully staying in the shadows. Outside, the diversionary attack continues, with Sheriff Bradley and his men exchanging fire with the Hawkins brothers' raiders. The shooting is spectacular, but largely harmless, exactly as Sarah had choreographed when she'd given the deputies their instructions. Girls got to be upstairs, Luke mutters. Probably thought we'd hit the front first, like common bandits. Sarah smiles in the darkness. The brothers' professional pride is working against them, making them see what they expect. An amateur's defensive strategy. They haven't considered that someone might turn their own professionalism into a weapon. She moves silently through the tunnel to her next position, remembering her grandfather's words about hunting mountain lions. They're beautiful creatures, little storm, but they get predictable when they think they're the hunters. Above, the brothers start up the stairs, their weight making the old wood creak in protest. Sarah counts their steps, timing their progress. When they reach the bedroom door, Luke positions himself to one side while Matt takes the other. Their coordination is impressive. Clearly they've done this many times before. Miss Mitchell, Luke calls out, his voice surprisingly gentle. We know you're in there. Come out now and no one needs to get hurt. Sarah triggers the first part of her trap, a simple device that drops a tin cup in the bedroom, creating the sound of someone startling at Luke's voice. Scared, Matt comments, with satisfaction. Good, scared people make mistakes. The brothers exchange glances, then Matt kicks in the door. They burst into the bedroom with practiced efficiency, covering all corners, but instead of finding a frightened farm girl, they find only empty darkness and a single lamp burning low. What the? Matt starts, but Luke's sharp intake of breath cuts him off. Look, the older brother says, pointing to the bed. There, laid out with deliberate precision, is a copy of the Red Rock Raiders' wanted poster. Scrawled across it in flowing script are the words, "Welcome to my house, gentlemen." Before they can process this, Sarah triggers her second trap. The lamp, rigged with a simple timing device, flares suddenly bright before exploding in a shower of glass and kerosene. The brothers instinctively turn away from the flash, giving Sarah the moment she needs. She emerges from a concealed panel in the bedroom wall, the Spencer carbine rock steady in her hands. That's far enough, she says quietly. The Hawkins brothers freeze, their weapons half raised. In the chaos outside, no one would have heard the lamp breaking or her entrance. I have to admit, Luke says, his voice still steady despite the situation. This is impressive. You used our own methods against us, watching, planning, choosing the ground. My grandfather taught me that the best way to hunt a professional is to think like one, Sarah replies. Drop your guns, slowly. Matt's shotgun twitches slightly. You really think you can take both of us? Even with the drop, one of us will get a shot off. Look at the floor, Sarah suggests. They do, noticing for the first time the thin wires running. Between their feet, tripwires connected to something beneath the floorboards. My grandfather was a great believer in backup plans, Sarah explains. Those wires run to enough black powder to turn this room into splinters. Dead man's trigger. If I fall, my weight releases the mechanism. Luke Hawkins actually smiles. The stories didn't do you justice, Miss Mitchell. We thought we were hunting an amateur who got lucky with Reed's gang. Instead you found someone who's been playing a role far longer than you have, Sarah finishes. Now about those guns. The brothers exchange one last look, then carefully lower their weapons to the floor. As they straighten, Luke's eyes narrow, thoughtfully. One question, if I may. The wanted poster. You knew we'd come to this room, knew we'd look at the bed first. How? Because it's what professionals do, Sarah says. Clear the most likely hiding spot first. Control the high ground. You did exactly what your reputation said you would. She allows herself a small smile. Sometimes the deadliest trap is simply knowing how your opponent thinks. Our employer won't be pleased, Matt says quietly. Sarah's rifle doesn't waver, but her mind races at this new information. Employer. I was under the impression the Hawkins brothers worked alone. Luke laughs softly. Times change, Miss Mitchell. Even professionals need backing these days, especially when the job involves someone of your particular talents. The Red Rock Raiders weren't enough of a message, Matt adds. Some people don't appreciate having their plans disrupted. What people? Sarah demands, but she already suspects the answer. The pieces are falling into place. Reed's cryptic warnings, the elaborate setup, the professional gunman. Ever hear of the Western Territories Investment Company? Luke asks. They've been buying up ranches all through Montana, creating opportunities, they call it. By running honest ranchers off their land, Sarah finishes. Her grandfather had mentioned the company once, warning her about men who use paper and money to steal what they couldn't take by force. Smart girl, Luke nods. Reed's gang was supposed to create enough chaos to drive down land prices. Make people eager to sell, but you interfered. Now the company's lost money, lost face, they don't like either. A sound from below, Billy's signal whistle. Sarah doesn't take her eyes off the brothers. Your men are surrendering. Some of them, Matt agrees, but I wouldn't get too comfortable, Miss Mitchell. The company doesn't stop with one setback. They've got resources you can't imagine. Judges, bankers, territorial officials, all with a vested interest in progress. And progress means running decent people off their land. Progress means whatever the company says it means, Luke says. Face it, girl, you're good. Maybe the best shot I've seen. But you can't fight an enemy. You can't see, can't shoot. Sarah thinks of her grandfather's lessons about different kinds of battles. Maybe not, but I can expose them. The sound of boots on the stairs, Sheriff Bradley and his deputies. But Sarah keeps her rifle trained on the brothers. Something, in their manner, bothers her. They're too calm for men who've been captured. One last thing, Luke says as Bradley enters. Check the paper in my vest pocket. Consider it a professional courtesy. Bradley retrieves the paper carefully. His face darkens as he reads. Sarah, it's a warrant, signed by Judge Morrison himself. For your arrest, the brothers smile in unison. The company, Luke says softly, always has a backup plan. A warrant? Sarah keeps her rifle steady, but her mind races. On what charges? Interfering with legitimate business interests. Luke quotes smoothly. Destruction of property. Threatening company representatives, meaning Reed and his boys, and my personal favorite, impersonating a male competitor at the Montana State Fair. That competition was 3 years ago, Sarah protests. The company Is very thorough, Matt says. They've been watching you for a while, Miss Mitchell, gathering evidence, building a case, that exhibition rifle of your grandfather's. Technically, it still belongs to the Rodeo Association. Using it could be considered theft. Sarah feels the ground shifting beneath her feet. They've taken her strength, her shooting, her grandfather's legacy, and turned it into a weapon against her. This is ridiculous, Bradley growls. That warrant's not worth the paper it's printed on. Signed by a territorial judge, Luke reminds him. Unless you're planning to defy a legal court order, Sheriff. Sarah sees the trap now, elegant in its simplicity. If Bradley ignores the warrant, he undermines his own authority. If he enforces it, the company gets what it wants. Her out of the way, her reputation tainted. There's more, Matt adds. Companies offering to drop all charges if Miss Mitchell agrees to sell her ranch. Fair market value, of course. After all, who'd want to buy property from someone facing criminal charges? You really think this will work? Sarah asks, genuine curiosity in her voice. The brothers exchange glances. It already has, Luke says. Dozen times at least. Company finds someone troublesome, digs up or manufactures some legal trouble, then offers a generous solution. Most folks take the deal. And if they don't, then the legal troubles get worse. Amazing how many witnesses can remember seeing things once there's company money involved. Sarah thinks of her grandfather's words about different kinds of courage. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't standing and fighting, it's knowing which battles matter most. Sheriff, she says quietly, take their guns. They're still under arrest for attacking your deputies. That warrant doesn't cover tonight's activities. You're making a mistake, Luke warns. The company made the mistake, Sarah interrupts. Tell your employers something from me. My grandfather used to say there are two kinds of predators, the ones that hunt alone and the ones that hunt in packs. The lone ones are dangerous, but predictable. It's the pack you have to watch out for. Is that supposed to be a threat? Matt asks. No, Sarah smiles. It's a lesson. You see, the company's been operating in the shadows, picking off isolated targets. But what happens when those targets start working together, when every ranch owner, every small farmer they've pressured starts comparing notes? Understanding dawns in Luke's eyes. The ledger, the one you took from Reed. Records of every payment, every threat, every deal. And now, thanks to you, I know who was really behind it all. She turns to Bradley. Sheriff, I believe Judge Parker would be very interested in this warrant. Particularly how a territorial judge came to sign it without a single sworn complaint. Bradley nods, a slow smile spreading under his mustache. Might have to send some telegrams. Let other sheriffs know to check their warrant books carefully. The company will still come after you, Luke warns, but there's respect in his voice now. Probably, Sarah agrees, but not the way they planned. Sometimes, gentlemen, the best shot isn't the one you take. It's the one you force your opponent to take. As Bradley leads the brothers away, Sarah realizes her grandfather was right about one more thing. Sometimes the most important battles aren't won with bullets, but with the courage to stand your ground when the enemy isn't just the person in front of you, but the corrupt system they serve. Sarah turns back to the bedroom, surveying the scene. The lamp's shattered glass glints in the moonlight streaming through the window. She resets the tripwires and mechanical triggers, her grandfather's lessons about always being prepared echoing in her mind. Billy appears in the doorway, his young face flushed with excitement. Miss Mitchell, we've secured all their men, but there's something else you need to see. He hands her a leather portfolio recovered from one of the raiders' saddlebags. Inside, Sarah finds detailed maps of Thunder Valley, along with photographs and documents about her grandfather. They've been watching you since before the Red Rock. Raiders, Billy says quietly. Look at the dates. Sarah flips through the papers, her heart sinking. Reports of her activities at various rodeos. Notes about her shooting patterns, even sketches of her ranch's layout, all dating back 3 years. The company doesn't take chances, a voice says from the doorway. Sheriff Bradley has returned, his face grim. Just got a telegram from Judge Parker. 3 other ranches in Montana have received similar warrants, all signed by different judges, all with connections to Western Territories investment. They're trying to build an empire, Sarah realizes. Not just land. They want to control who has the right to live here, to make a living. There's more, Bradley continues. Remember those water rights disputes last summer? The ones that drove the Henderson family off their spread? Company was behind those too. They've got men in the land office, the territorial courts, but now we can prove it, Sarah interrupts, holding up the portfolio. Between this and Reed's ledger, we have evidence of a conspiracy that crosses territorial lines. That makes it a federal matter. They'll try to bury it, Billy warns. Men like that, they've got friends in high places. Sarah walks to the window, looking out over her land, the same view her grandfather had loved. Then we'll have to be smarter than them. Fight them the way they fight, not just with guns, but with information, with alliances. She turns back to Bradley and Billy, her mind already forming a plan. Sheriff, how many other law enforcement officers do you trust? Completely trust? Bradley strokes his mustache thoughtfully. 6 maybe. Good men who can't be bought. And I know riders from my rodeo days, Sarah adds. People who've seen the company's work firsthand, but were too scared to fight alone. You're talking about building a network, Billy says, understanding dawning on his young face. More than that, Sarah smiles. We're going to turn their own strategy against them. While they're watching for guns and badges, we'll be gathering evidence, sharing information, building cases they can't bury. It's dangerous, Bradley warns. They'll come at you harder when they realize what you're doing. Probably, Sarah agrees. But my grandfather used to say something about predators. They're most dangerous when they're wounded, but that's also when they make mistakes. The company's used to operating in the shadows. Let's see how they handle the light. The night wind carries the smell of sage through the broken window, and with it, the promise of change. Sarah Mitchell, the quiet ranch girl turned legend, has found a new kind of battle to fight. One that requires not just a steady hand and a sharp eye, but the courage to stand against corruption that wears a respectable face. Dawn breaks over Thunder Valley with an urgency Sarah Mitchell hasn't felt since her competition days. She's been up all night studying the company documents spread across her kitchen table, connecting threads that paint an increasingly disturbing picture. Look at this pattern, she tells Sheriff Bradley, who's returned after securing the Hawkins brothers in the jail. She points to a map marked with dates and property sales. Every time the company moves into a new territory, the same sequence plays out. First, mysterious accidents and property damage, then criminal activity increases. Like the Red Rock Raiders, Billy interjects. He's taken up position by the window, keeping watch while helping sort through the evidence. Exactly, Sarah nods. Once people are scared enough, legal troubles start. Suddenly old property disputes resurface, water rights get complicated, and then the company appears offering solutions. Bradley finishes, his mustache twitching with disgust. Been seeing the same pattern in 4 counties now. Never could prove the connection, though. Sarah pulls out another document, a ledger page showing a web of payments and shell companies. They're careful. Look how they structure everything through different entities. The Western Territories Investment Company itself barely appears in any official records. Smart, Bradley admits, makes it harder to prove conspiracy. But not impossible, Sarah says, reaching for her grandfather's rifle and beginning her daily cleaning routine. The familiar motions help her think. The company's size is both its strength and its weakness. They need a lot of people to make their scheme work, which means a lot of potential weak points. A knock at the door makes them all tense. Billy's hand drops to his gun, but Sarah recognizes the pattern. 3 quick taps, followed by 2 slow ones. "It's Martha," she says. "Mrs." Bradley enters carrying a basket of fresh biscuits, but her face is troubled. "You need to hear what's happening in town," she says without preamble. "Company men have been talking to folks at the general store, saying how the territory's getting too dangerous for decent folk, how we need proper business interests to bring stability." "They work fast," Sarah comments dryly. "That's not all," Martha continues. "They're offering loans to struggling ranchers. Terms seem generous at first, but I heard Mrs. Henderson talking about the fine print. Something about property being used as collateral." "Classic trap," Bradley growls. "Get folks in debt, then change the terms. Company's done it before." Sarah stands abruptly, an idea forming. "Mrs. Bradley, how many of the Ladies' Aid Society would be willing to help fight back against these people?" Martha's eyes light up with understanding. "All of them, I'd wager. Once they understand what's really happening. We've been watching our friends and neighbors get driven out for 2 years now." "Good," Sarah says, "because I need you to organize. Something for me. The company expects resistance from men with guns. They don't expect to be fought with gossip and garden parties." "What are you thinking?" Bradley asks. "The company works by isolating people, making them think they're alone. So let's change that. Martha, I want you to invite every rancher's wife, every farmer's daughter, everyone who's been pressured by the company to a social event. Make it look like a normal Ladies' Aid meeting." Martha nods, understanding blooming on her face. "They won't suspect anything. Ladies always gather to gossip and plan church socials." "Exactly," Sarah confirms. "But this time we'll be sharing more than recipes. Every story about mysterious accidents, every suspicious loan term, every coincidence that wasn't really a coincidence, it all gets compared. And once people realize they're not alone," Billy starts, "they'll be harder to intimidate," Sarah finishes. But that's just the beginning. Martha, I need you to do something else. Start collecting records, property deeds, loan documents, water rights papers, anything that might show the company's pattern." "The ladies love their record keeping," Martha says with a gleam in her eye. "Especially Mrs. Henderson. That woman has saved every piece of paper that's crossed her path since 1862. Sarah turns to Billy. "And you, Deputy, I need you to put those observation skills to work. The company will be sending more men to replace the Hawkins brothers. I want to know who arrives in town, who they talk to, where they go." "Already started," Billy says proudly. "Got some of the younger boys helping. Nobody notices kids playing in the street." "Good. Sheriff, how soon can you get word to those trusted lawmen you mentioned?" Bradley considers. "Got a deputy riding. A circuit. Could have messages out by the end of week, but Sarah," he hesitates, "the company's got deep pockets. They'll have men watching telegraph offices, reading mail. Then we don't use telegraphs or mail," Sarah says simply. "My grandfather didn't just teach me shooting. He taught me about the old cavalry dispatch routes, trails that don't show. Up on modern maps. We'll use those." A sound outside draws their attention. Horses approaching. Through the window, they spot 3 riders coming up the road. Their clothes are expensive, their manner businesslike. "Right on schedule," Sarah murmurs. "Company men coming to make their generous offer." "Want us to run them off?" Billy asks hopefully. "No," Sarah says, moving to put her grandfather's rifle back above the fireplace. "Let them come. Sometimes the best way to understand your enemy is to let them think they're winning." She quickly adjusts her hair and apron, once again becoming the picture of a concerned young rancher. "Mrs. Bradley, those biscuits smell delicious. Why don't you and I set them out? Nothing disarms a man like thinking he's got the upper hand over women discussing baking." As Martha arranges the biscuits, Sarah positions herself carefully. When the company men enter, they'll see exactly what they expect. A young woman, clearly overwhelmed by recent events, seeking guidance from a respectable older lady. They won't notice Billy slipping out the back to follow their back trail, or Bradley quietly documenting every word they say. The knock comes. Polite, professional. Sarah catches Martha's eye and nods slightly. The game begins. Miss Mitchell, a cultured voice calls. Gerald Hawthorne from Western Territories Investment. We'd like to discuss your recent difficulties. Sarah opens the door, the very picture of relief. Oh, thank goodness. Please, come in. Mrs. Bradley and I were just saying how we need someone who understands business to advise us. The three men enter, expensive suits, confident smiles, ledgers tucked under their arms. They take in the scene exactly as Sarah has staged it. Fresh biscuits, worried women, and a rifle conspicuously returned to its place above the fireplace. We understand you've had some trouble with certain criminal elements, Hawthorne says, smoothly accepting a biscuit. Unfortunate but not unexpected. The territories are becoming increasingly dangerous for independent ranchers, especially those operating alone. It's been frightening, Sarah admits, letting her voice quaver slightly. First the raiders, then those awful Hawkins brothers. Precisely. Why we're here, another man interjects. Our company specializes in helping honest ranchers navigate these difficult times. We have resources, connections. He pauses meaningfully. Protection. Sarah exchanges a worried glance with Martha. Protection sounds expensive, she says hesitantly. Hawthorne smiles benignly. Please, Miss Mitchell, let's discuss how Western Territories Investment can help secure your future. Sarah listens carefully as Hawthorne outlines the company's proposal, noting how skillfully he weaves threats into his promises. His terms sound reasonable on the surface. The company would provide management assistance while allowing her to retain nominal ownership of the ranch. Of course, he adds smoothly, there would be certain conditions, standards to maintain, and given your recent legal complications, the warrant, Sarah says quietly, playing her role. But surely that was a mistake. Bureaucratic oversights. It can be resolved, the third man speaks for the first time. Our company has considerable influence with territorial authorities for our partners. Martha refills their coffee cups, her movements deliberately domestic. But Sarah notices how she positions herself to hear every word. I don't know, Sarah hesitates. My grandfather always said a rancher should keep control of their own land. Admirable sentiment, Hawthorne says. But times change. The territories are modernizing. Small independent ranchers simply can't compete with organized business interests. Better to adapt than be left behind. He pulls out a contract, placing it on the table. Our standard partnership agreement. Very generous terms, given the circumstances. I suggest you review it carefully, though. He glances meaningfully at the window, where dust from approaching riders can be seen. I should mention our offer is time-sensitive. Sarah peers out at the riders. More company men, no doubt, positioned themselves to add pressure to Hawthorne's generous offer. How long do I have to decide? She asks, letting fear creep into her voice. Let's say 24 hours. Hawthorne stands, straightening his jacket. I'm sure a sensible young woman like yourself will make the right choice. After all. His smile doesn't reach his eyes. It would be tragic if any more accidents were to happen in Thunder Valley. After they leave, Sarah immediately drops her timid demeanor. Mrs. Bradley, how many ladies can you gather by sunset? Most of them, Martha says firmly. Especially once I tell them what's really happening. Good. Billy, follow those riders. I want to know where they go, who they talk to. What about the contract? Bradley asks, examining the document Hawthorne left. Sarah smiles grimly. Oh, I'll study it very carefully. Every word, every clause. And then we'll show everyone in the valley exactly how the company operates. She picks up her grandfather's rifle, checking the action. They think they're forcing my hand, but sometimes, when someone's trying to back you into a corner, that's exactly where you want to be, Bradley finishes, remembering her grandfather's words. Exactly, because from here we can see all their moves, and they won't see ours coming until it's too late. The sun climbs higher over Thunder Valley. As Sarah Mitchell prepares for a different kind of shootout, one where the weapons are information and truth, and the target isn't a single opponent, but a system built on greed and corruption. Her grandfather's voice echoes in her memory. Remember, little Storm, the most dangerous predator isn't always the one with the sharpest claws. Sometimes it's the one that convinces its prey to walk willingly into the trap. Well, Sarah thinks, loading her rifle, it's time to show the company what happens when the prey decides to become the hunter. Sarah spends the next few hours studying the contract with meticulous attention, her grandfather's lessons about reading fine print guiding her trained eye. The document is a masterpiece of legal deception, clauses hidden within clauses, terms that seem beneficial but contain deadly hooks. Look at this, she tells Bradley, pointing to a particularly clever paragraph. Standard maintenance requirements seem reasonable enough, but cross-reference it with Section 12. They could declare the ranch in violation at any time, Bradley realizes. And this part about associated business interests, they're not just trying to take the ranch. They want control of the water rights, the grazing permits, everything. Martha returns as the sun begins to set, bringing news from town. 23 ladies coming tonight. More wanted to come, but we thought that might draw attention. Perfect, Sarah nods. Mrs. Henderson? Bringing every document she's saved for the past decade. And Sarah? Martha's eyes sparkle. She mentioned something about her brother working at the land office in Helena. Said he's been seeing some mighty strange paperwork lately. Sarah's mind races with the possibilities. The company's been so focused on watching sheriffs and judges, they forgot about clerks and secretaries. People tend to forget who really knows everything that happens in a territory, Martha agrees. Ladies who organize church socials, boys who deliver messages, men who drive the mail wagons. Speaking of which, Billy bursts in, breathless from riding. Those company men, they split up. 2 headed for the bank, one's talking to Judge Morrison's clerk. And I saw 3 more riders coming in from the east, professional types like the Hawkins brothers. They're not wasting any time, Bradley observes. No, Sarah agrees, checking her rifle out of habit. They'll want to lock down the valley before word spreads. Show everyone what happens to people who don't cooperate. She moves to the window, watching the sun paint the valley in shades of gold. The same view she'd shared with her grandfather as he taught her about reading signs, about understanding the land and the people who lived on it. You know what they're really afraid of, she says suddenly. It's not the shooting. They can handle that. Just hire more guns. What terrifies them is people talking to each other, comparing notes, realizing they're not alone. That's why they work so hard to isolate folks, Bradley agrees. Well then, Sarah turns back to the room, a plan forming. Let's give them something real to be afraid of. Mrs. Bradley, when the ladies arrive, I want to show them something. Billy, get ready to ride. We'll need copies of these documents spread across 3 territories by morning. They'll try to stop us, Billy warns. Sarah smiles, touching her grandfather's rifle. Counting on it. Sometimes you have to make your enemy show their hand. Make them react exactly where and when you want them to. The night promises to be long, but Sarah Mitchell has never felt more awake. The quiet ranch girl who hid her talents is gone, replaced by something new. A leader who understands that the most important battles aren't always won with bullets. The company thought they could pressure her into submission. Instead, they've given her exactly what she needs, proof of their methods and a reason for people to stand together. Now it's time to show them that Thunder Valley isn't just home to the best shot in 3 territories. It's home to something far more dangerous, people who refuse to be afraid. As night falls over Thunder Valley, Sarah's kitchen transforms into a war room of a different kind. The Ladies' Aid Society members arrive in small groups, their usual baskets of baked goods and handicrafts concealing documents and records. Mrs. Henderson spreads her collection across the table, decades of property records, bank notices, and correspondence that piece together the company's patient conquest of the territory. Here, the older woman points to a letter dated 3 years back. First time they approached my brother at the land office, offered him a consulting fee to expedite certain paperwork. Sarah examines the letter. Did he take it? James. Heavens, no. But he started keeping records of every suspicious filing that crossed his desk. Said something felt wrong about how many old land claims were suddenly being discovered. Other women add their pieces to the puzzle. Mrs. Thompson reveals how her husband's banking troubles began right after refusing to sell. Mrs. Parker describes mysterious accidents at her son's freight company after he asked questions about certain shipments. It's not just here, Sarah explains, showing them the documents from her grandfather's chest. The company's been doing this across 3 territories. Same pattern, same methods. They isolate, pressure, then offer help that turns into control. But why? Young Alice Cooper asks. At 19, she's the newest member of the Aid Society. Why go to all this trouble? Railroad's coming, Mrs. Henderson says grimly. My brother's seen the survey maps. New line is planned through Thunder Valley, but they're keeping it quiet. Anyone who owns land along the route will make a fortune. Sarah finishes, but only if they still own it when the railroad announces its plans. Martha Bradley moves to the map on the wall, tracing the pattern of recent property sales. Every ranch they've pressured, every water right they've challenged, they all line up with the proposed route. So what do we do? Alice demands. We can't fight a whole company. Sarah stands, her presence commanding attention, just as it had in the rodeo ring. No, but we can expose them. Every paper trail, every corrupt deal, every accident that wasn't really an accident, it all tells a story. One that territorial authorities can't ignore, especially once it spreads beyond their control. She reveals her plan, watching, understanding. Dawn in their faces. The women of Thunder Valley have always been its true backbone, running households, managing accounts, noticing what their husbands often missed. Now they would become its defenders. Mrs. Henderson, your brother's land office. Records give us their legal maneuvers. Mrs. Thompson, the banking documents show their financial pressure. Mrs. Parker, the freight company records prove how they enforce compliance. And your shooting gives us protection, Martha adds. More than that, Sarah corrects. It gives us time. The company's focused on me now, the troublesome sharpshooter who needs to be dealt with. While they watch for my rifle, they won't notice their real danger. Us, Mrs. Henderson says proudly. Information spreads faster than bullets, Sarah agrees. And unlike bullets, once the truth is out, you can't call it back. The women divide into teams, each with specific tasks. Some will gather more evidence. Others will spread the word through seemingly innocent social calls. The Ladies' Aid Society transforms into an intelligence network that would put military scouts to shame. As they work, Sarah catches glimpses of movement outside, company men. Watching the house, no doubt reporting on this suspicious gathering of ranch wives and daughters. Let them watch, she thinks. Let them believe it's just another social club meeting. Her grandfather's voice echoes in her memory. The best shot, little storm, isn't always the one that hits the target. Sometimes it's the one that makes your opponent look exactly where you want them to look. The women of Thunder Valley have been underestimated their entire lives. Now that very assumption would become their weapon. Dawn creeps over Thunder Valley 2 days after the Ladies' Aid Society meeting. Sarah Mitchell checks her rifle out of habit, watching dust clouds approach from the east. More company men. No. And doubt, the 4th group this week. Miss Mitchell, Billy gallops up, his horse lathered from hard riding. Telegraph came for Sheriff Bradley. Judge Parker's been arrested in Helena. Sarah's hands are still on the rifle. What charges? Corruption. They're saying he took bribes to dismiss cases against small ranchers. Billy's voice shakes with anger. Everyone knows it's not true. No, but it's smart, Sarah says grimly. The company's showing they can reach anyone, even a federal judge. Inside, she finds Martha Bradley sorting through the growing pile of evidence the Ladies' Aid Society has gathered. 3 more foreclosure notices this morning, Martha reports. All on ranches that refuse the company's partnership offers. They're squeezing harder, Sarah observes, which means we're hurting them. A knock at the door. Their special pattern. Mrs. Henderson enters, clutching a letter. From my brother at the land office. Companies filed papers to challenge every water right in the valley. Says there were irregularities in the original grants. Without water rights, no ranch can survive, Sarah says. They're trying to force everyone to sell at once. That's not all. Mrs. Henderson's voice drops. James says there's talk in Helena about investigating illegal competitions at rodeos. Specifically, women competing while disguised as men. Sarah feels the noose tightening. The company is moving on all fronts. Legal pressure, financial threats, and personal attacks. They've realized she's more than just a good shot. What about our information? She asks Martha, moving faster than they can stop it. Ladies' Aid Societies in 3 territories are comparing notes. Mrs. Thompson's cousin at the bank in Sweetwater confirmed identical pressure tactics there. And Alice Cooper's father found matches between land office records and railroad survey maps. Sarah moves to the window, checking sightlines out of habit. 2 company men watch the house from the ridge. Their presence is meant to intimidate, but it tells her something else. They're scared. Billy, she calls, ride to town. Tell Sheriff Bradley it's time for the next phase. You sure? The young deputy fingers his badge nervously. Once we start this... They've already started it, Sarah interrupts. Now we show them what happens when people stop being afraid and start working together. As Billy rides out, Sarah picks up her grandfather's rifle. She has 12 hours before Hawthorne's deadline expires. 12 hours to spring a trap 3 weeks in the making. The company thinks they're watching a wounded animal in its den. They're about to learn they've been standing in the crosshairs all along. 3 hours later, Sarah's kitchen has become a hub of carefully orchestrated chaos. Mrs. Thompson rushes in, her usually impeccable hair escaping its pins. Company men. At the bank, she reports breathlessly. They're calling in loans early, demanding immediate payment. Right on schedule, Sarah nods. Mrs. Henderson, the older woman smiles with grim satisfaction. Land office records are safely copied and distributed. Even if they pressure James to destroy the originals, 20 copies are already headed to newspapers across 3 territories. Sarah checks her grandfather's pocket watch. 9 hours until Hawthorne's deadline. The company's escalating pressure tells her they're starting to realize the true threat. Not her rifle, but the network of information spreading beyond their control. A shot rings out from the ridge, not aimed to hit, just a warning. The company watchers are making their presence known. They're getting nervous, Martha observes. Good. Sarah moves to the fireplace, retrieving a hidden stack of papers from behind a loose brick. Time for the next step. Mrs. Thompson, is your sister's ladies' group in Sweetwater ready? Just waiting for the signal. Same with the Methodist Aid Society in Helena and the Quilting Circle in Fort Benton. Sarah lays out 3 identical documents, sworn affidavits from former company employees, detailing exactly how they engineered accidents and property disputes, currently sitting in sealed envelopes with 3 different territorial judges. But Judge Parker's been arrested. Billy reminds her, returning from his town ride. Exactly. The company will think they've contained the threat. They don't know about Judge Williams in Fort Benton or Judge Harrison in Sweetwater. Sarah's smile is sharp. Amazing how many people are willing to talk once they realize they're not alone. Another shot from the ridge, closer this time. The company men are getting bolder. They'll come tonight, Billy warns, before the deadline. Try to force the issue. Counting. On it. Sarah checks her rifle's action. That's why we need everyone in position. Mrs. Henderson, make sure all the ladies know their parts. Martha, get word to the sheriff. Tonight's performance needs to look convincing. The women scatter on their assigned tasks, leaving Sarah alone with Billy. The young deputy studies her curiously. This was never about the shooting, was it? He asks. All those tricks, making them focus on your rifle skills. My grandfather used to say something about hunting mountain lions, Sarah replies. Said the most dangerous ones aren't the ones you see coming. They're the ones that get you looking one way while they attack from another. She moves to the window, watching dust clouds rise as riders spread out across Thunder Valley. The company is mobilizing its forces, preparing to crush what they think is a simple armed resistance. They don't realize that Sarah Mitchell's true weapon isn't her marksmanship, but the web of information and allies she spent weeks weaving. While they watch for bullets, they miss the real threat, truth spreading like wildfire through channels they couldn't control. Tonight, the company will make its move, and Thunder Valley will be ready with a response they never saw coming. Ryder appears on the horizon, not one of the company men. Sarah recognizes the signal. 3 short waves, 1 long. News from Sheriff Bradley. The Hawkins brothers escaped, Billy announces, bursting through the door. Judge Morrison signed their release papers personally. Sarah nods, unsurprised. And the company's men, moving into position. At least 30 riders, all professionals. They're setting up a perimeter around the valley. Mrs. Henderson returns with more news. Telegraph lines to Fort Benton are down. They're trying to isolate us. Too late, Sarah says, checking her ammunition. The information's already spread. Now we just need to give them enough rope to hang themselves. She pulls out her grandfather's map of Thunder Valley, marked with carefully planned positions. Red circles show where company men are gathering. Blue X's mark where Sheriff Bradley's. Deputies wait unseen. Everyone clear on their roles? She asks. Martha nods. Ladies' Aid Society is ready. The moment shooting starts, we move. And the documents, Sarah confirms, placed exactly where you specified, Mrs. Henderson assures her. In plain sight, but they'll have to reveal themselves to get them. Sarah checks the position of the sun. 3 hours until sunset. The company will want to move under cover of darkness, thinking it gives them advantage. Billy, get word to the sheriff. Tell him to let the Hawkins brothers know I'm waiting. Let's see how they handle a rematch. As Billy rides out, Sarah touches her grandfather's rifle one last time. Tonight isn't about shooting. It's about forcing the company to show its true face to the world. The quiet ranch girl who hid her talents is gone. In her place stands someone new, a woman who learned that sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't a bullet, but the truth it forces into the light. Thunder Valley holds its breath as shadows lengthen. The trap is set. Now it's time to see who's really been hunting whom. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows across Sarah's ranch as final preparations are made. Inside, Mrs. Henderson marks another location on their map. Latest report, she says. Company men gathering at Peterson's old place. Must be at least 20 riders. Their main force, Sarah confirms. But watch the South Ridge. That's where the real threat will come from. On cue, Billy appears in the doorway. Hawkins brothers spotted heading south. They're taking the old mining trail. Sarah smiles grimly. Just like I thought. They'll try to flank us while the main force draws attention. Martha Bradley returns from town, her market basket concealing more than just supplies. Documents are all in place. Land office records are hidden exactly where you said, and the company men? Following Mrs. Thompson right now. She's playing her part perfectly, acting nervous, clutching that fake document case like it contains gold. Sarah checks her rifle's action one final time. Good. Let them think those are the only copies. While they're chasing shadows. The real evidence is already spreading, Mrs. Henderson finishes. A shot echoes from the ridge. Another warning. The company is getting impatient. Miss Mitchell, Billy says hesitantly, even if this works, Even if we expose everything, the company's got deep pockets. They'll just hire more guns, bribe more judges. Maybe, Sarah agrees, but my grandfather taught me something about predators. Once they lose their advantage of surprise, once their prey starts working together. She moves to the window, watching. Riders gather in the distance. They find out they're not as powerful as they thought. The sun touches the horizon. 2 hours until full dark. Sarah knows every shadow in Thunder Valley, every hiding place. More importantly, she knows its people, not just their strengths, but their courage when finally given a chance to fight back. The company thinks they're facing one sharpshooting ranch girl. They're about to learn they're dealing with an entire community that's done being afraid. Thunder Valley awaits the coming storm, its defenders hidden but ready. Sarah Mitchell, the quiet ranch girl turned legend, prepares to spring a trap that's been weeks in the making. Tonight will determine not just her fate, but the future of every family who calls this valley home. Darkness falls over Thunder Valley, like a velvet curtain, bringing with it the promise of violence. Sarah Mitchell stands in her darkened kitchen, counting shadows moving through the twilight. The company's men are getting bolder, closing their circle around her ranch. 37 riders total, Billy reports, returning from his surveillance. Main force at Peterson's, smaller groups at every major approach. And he hesitates. The Hawkins brothers. South Ridge, like you predicted, but they're not alone. There's someone else with them, someone important. Saw a fancy carriage behind their lines. Sarah's hand tightens on her rifle. Description. Expensive. Eastern. Make. The kind you'd see in Helena or Denver. Gerald Hawthorne, Martha Bradley says grimly. Company director himself. My Henry saw him at the bank yesterday, meeting with Judge Morrison. Sarah moves to the window, studying the gathering darkness. So they're all here, every piece on the board. Mrs. Henderson spreads their latest intelligence on the kitchen table. Company's been busy. 3 more property seizures today. Judge Morrison signed the papers without even reading them. And the real documents. Safe, Mrs. Henderson confirms. Every Ladies' Aid Society from here to Fort Benton has copies. Even if they stop one set from getting out, they can't stop them all, Sarah finishes. She checks her grandfather's pocket. Watch. 1 hour until their deadline. They'll move before then, trying to catch us unprepared. A shot rings out, closer than the warning shots before. Sarah doesn't flinch. Right on time. They're getting impatient. Billy's hand drops to his gun. Miss Mitchell, even with the sheriff's men in position, we're outnumbered. These aren't just hired guns anymore. The company's brought in their best. Good, Sarah says softly. Because I'm tired of fighting shadows. Time to face the real power behind all this. She moves to her grandfather's chest, removing not just ammunition but papers, documents she's been saving for exactly this moment. Mrs. Bradley, get a word to the sheriff. Tell him to wait for my signal before moving his men. What about us? Mrs. Henderson asks. The Ladies' Aid Society has the most important job of all, Sarah tells her. No matter what happens here tonight, make sure the truth gets out. Every piece of evidence, every connection we've uncovered, it all needs to reach people who can't be bought or threatened. Martha Bradley straightens her apron with determination. We won't fail you, Sarah. I know. Sarah checks her rifle one final time. Now go. The company's watching this house, but they won't notice a few ladies heading to their evening social. As the women slip away into the darkness, Sarah positions herself carefully. The company thinks they're watching a cornered animal. They don't realize she's been leading them step by step to exactly this moment. A horse approaches, single rider, coming in slow. Sarah recognizes the sound of expensive boots on her porch steps. Miss Mitchell, Gerald Hawthorne's cultured voice, carries clearly. I believe we should discuss a revision to our previous offer. Sarah exchanges glances with Billy, who positions himself in the shadows. The real game is about to begin. Come in, Mr. Hawthorne, she calls. I've been expecting you. The company director enters, impeccably dressed despite the late hour. His smile doesn't reach his eyes. I must admit, Miss Mitchell, you've led us on quite a chase. But I think it's time we had an honest conversation about the future of Thunder Valley. Sarah keeps her rifle visible but not aimed. Honest conversations seem rare in your line of work. Hawthorne moves further into the kitchen, his expensive coat dusted with the evening's gathering darkness. His confidence speaks of a man used to controlling every situation he enters. You've caused quite a stir, Miss Mitchell, our board of directors. Is we concerned about recent developments in Thunder Valley? The truth tends to do that, Sarah responds, noting his subtle glances around the room, assessing exits and angles. Truth? He laughs softly. Such a malleable concept out here in the territories. Take your current situation. A young woman interfering with legitimate business interests, spreading unfounded accusations, consorting with known criminals like young Billy there. Billy stiffens in the shadows, but Sarah's slight head shake keeps him still. Interesting definition of legitimate, Sarah says. Does it include forged land grants, staged accidents, bribing judges? Progress requires a firm hand, Miss Mitchell. The territories are changing. Small ranchers, independent operators, they're relics of a dying age. The future belongs to organization, to proper business methods. Like hiring the Hawkins brothers to terrorize honest people. They provide necessary persuasion when reason fails. Hawthorne moves to the window, seemingly casual, but placing himself where he can see both approaches to the house. Speaking of which, they're quite eager for a rematch. Professional pride, you understand. Sarah watches him carefully. Why are you really here, Mr. Hawthorne? Surely a company director has better things to do than deliver threats personally. Ah, but you're special, Miss Mitchell. You've become something of a symbol. The brave young woman standing against progress. His smile turns predatory. Or perhaps the foolish girl who doesn't understand she's already lost. He produces a document from his coat. Complete title to your ranch, water rights included. Fair. Market value, plus a generous bonus for your cooperation. Sign now and all these unpleasant legal matters disappear. The warrant, the property disputes, everything. And if I refuse, then I'm afraid things become considerably less pleasant. We know about the rodeo competitions, Miss Mitchell. The ones you entered illegally under your grandfather's name. The prize money you collected through fraud. The territorial prison takes a dim view of such matters. Sarah's finger rests lightly on her rifle's trigger guard. You seem very well informed. We make it our business to know everything about potential obstacles. For instance, we know about your little network of ladies gathering evidence. Quite clever, using social calls to spread information. But did you really think we wouldn't notice? Oh, I was counting on it, Sarah says quietly. Just like I was counting on you being here tonight. Something in her tone makes Hawthorne pause. For the first time, uncertainty flickers across his face. You see, Mr. Hawthorne, while you were watching me, tracking my movements, following my associates, you never asked yourself who might be watching you. A signal whistle cuts through the night, 3 short bursts, followed by a long one. Sarah's smile turns dangerous. Did you really think my grandfather only taught me shooting? The signal whistle echoes across Thunder Valley as Sarah faces Hawthorne in her darkened kitchen. Before he can react, more whistles answer from different directions, a carefully orchestrated symphony that tells her every piece is in position. Interesting thing about company men, Sarah says, her rifle steady. They're so focused on following orders, they don't notice what's happening right in front of them. Hawthorne's composure cracks slightly. What have you done? Me? I just did what any good rancher would do, protected what's mine. She moves to the window, gesturing at the darkness. But while your men were watching this house, counting rifles and tracking riders, they missed something important. The ladies. Aid society, he says with dawning comprehension. Not just them, every ranch wife who's lost land to your schemes, every shop girl who's overheard your men's plans, every clerk and secretary who's handled your paperwork. All those people you thought weren't worth noticing. Hoofbeats approach, dozens of riders emerging from the darkness. But they're not coming for Sarah's ranch. They're surrounding the company's positions. "You're bluffing," Hawthorne says, but uncertainty edges his voice. "Our men have this valley locked down." "Do they?" Sarah allows herself a small smile. "Check your fancy pocket watch, Mr. Hawthorne. About now, your men at Peterson's place should be discovering some interesting documents, evidence of your land fraud scheme, complete with witness statements and bank records." Impossible. Those papers were destroyed. The originals, maybe, but ladies love to make copies. Share recipes, patterns, evidence of criminal conspiracy. She moves closer, keeping her rifle ready. "And while your Hawkins brothers watch the South Ridge, federal marshals are moving in from the north. Seems Judge Parker had some insurance against false charges, evidence he was gathering about company corruption, evidence that's now in very safe hands." Hawthorne's hand twitches toward his coat, but Billy's gun appears from the shadows. "I wouldn't," the young deputy warns. "Even if what you're saying is true," Hawthorne says carefully, "the company has resources you can't imagine. Connections that reach to the territorial governor, the railroad commission," Sarah interrupts. "Amazing how many important men keep detailed records of their corrupt dealings, almost like they don't trust their partners." More whistles sound. Sarah's network signaling that each phase of her plan is proceeding. The trap she spent weeks preparing is finally closing. "You see, Mr. Hawthorne, you made a crucial mistake. You looked at Thunder Valley and saw what you wanted to see: isolated ranchers, weak-willed townspeople, a young woman playing at being her grandfather's heir. You never noticed we were building something stronger than your hired guns could break." A shot rings out from the South Ridge, the Hawkins brothers making their move. But Sarah doesn't flinch. "Right on time," she murmurs. "Sheriff Bradley's been waiting for them to show their hand." More shots follow, then shouts of surprise as the company's men discover they're caught between forces they never saw coming. "It's over, Mr. Hawthorne," Sarah says quietly. "Your men are surrounded, your evidence is exposed, and by morning every newspaper from here to Denver will be running the story of how Western Territory's investment tried to steal an entire valley." Hawthorne's composed facade finally cracks as he processes the full scope of Sarah's plan. "You've been orchestrating this since the beginning. The shooting, the confrontations were exactly what you expected to see," Sarah finishes. "A young woman fighting back the only way she knew how. While you watched for bullets, you missed the real threat. Through the window, lanterns spring to life across Thunder Valley. Not random lights, but a carefully planned signal pattern. Each flame represents another piece of Sarah's network activating. The Ladies' Aid Society meetings weren't just for sharing information," she explains. "Every woman who lost land to your schemes, every family you threatened, they've been waiting for this moment. Right now, your men are discovering that the simple ranch wives they ignored have them completely surrounded." More shots from the South Ridge, followed by shouts of surprise. The Hawkins brothers have discovered their escape route blocked by Sheriff Bradley's deputies, strategically positioned hours ago. "Impossible," Hawthorne mutters. "Our intelligence was exactly what we wanted you to see. Your spies in town watched me practice shooting, counted armed men, and tracked obvious movements, but they never noticed the real operation happening right under their noses." A thunder of hooves approaches, more riders emerging from the darkness. But these aren't company men. These are ranchers' wives, shopkeepers' daughters, all the harmless women the company overlooked, each carrying evidence of corruption gathered over weeks of careful observation. "Your men are professionals, Mr. Hawthorne. They know when a position is untenable." As if to prove her point, a white flag appears on the South Ridge. The Hawkins brothers, recognizing a superior strategy, are surrendering. "And the best part," Sarah continues, allowing herself a small smile, Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every document proving your corruption. They're not just here in Thunder Valley. By now, copies are spreading across 3 territories, delivered by a network of ladies' societies, church groups, and social clubs. The very people your company thought were too insignificant to notice. Hawthorne's hand clenched on his fancy walking stick. The company will deny everything. We have lawyers, powerful friends, who'll be far too busy saving themselves to help you. You see those lanterns, Mr. Hawthorne? Each one represents another piece of evidence being revealed. Bank records in Sweetwater, land office documents in Helena, witness statements in Fort Benton. A whole web of corruption exposed not by guns or badges, but by the quiet strength of people who refuse to be afraid anymore. The night air carries the sound of more surrendering company men, their professional discipline crumbling in the face of a trap they never saw coming. My grandfather taught me more than just shooting, Sarah says softly. He taught me that the most dangerous predator isn't the one with the sharpest claws. It's the one that understands how to unite others against a common threat. Dawn breaks over Thunder Valley, painting the sky in shades of victory. Sarah Mitchell stands on her porch, watching federal marshals lead away the last of the company men. The night's events have transformed more than just the valley. They've shifted the balance of power across 3 territories. Final count, Sheriff Bradley reports, joining her. 32 company men in custody, including the Hawkins brothers and Hawthorne himself. Found enough evidence in that fancy carriage of his to put him away for years. And the documents? Already reaching newspapers across the territory. Martha says the Ladies' Aid Network worked perfectly. The company couldn't stop the story, even if they wanted to. Sarah's attention is drawn to movement on the South Ridge, riders approaching, but not company men this time. She recognizes Judge Parker at the head of the group, freed from his false imprisonment and carrying papers that will change everything. Miss Mitchell, the judge calls out as he dismounts. You'll be pleased to know that the federal investigation is officially underway. Western Territory's investments assets are frozen, their contracts suspended pending review. The other ranchers, Sarah asks, thinking of all the families who lost land to the company's schemes. Every fraudulent transfer will be examined, Parker assures her. I've already appointed a special commission, one that includes several members. Of the Ladies' Aid Society, I might add. Mrs. Henderson's knowledge of land records proved quite impressive. Sarah smiles, remembering her grandfather's words about seeing what others miss. The company had built their empire on the assumption that their victims would remain isolated, afraid to fight back. They never expected those same victims to unite, to turn their shared experience into a weapon. Billy approaches, his deputy's badge gleaming in the morning light. Company riders spotted heading east, the ones who escaped last night. They're spreading the word to other operations. Good, Sarah says quietly. Let them run. Let them tell every corrupt business, every crooked official, what happens when people stop being afraid and start working together. Mrs. Henderson arrives with fresh coffee and news from her network. Similar gatherings starting in other territories. Ladies' Aid Societies in Wyoming and Dakota are comparing notes, finding patterns. The company's whole operation is unraveling. Because you gave people hope, Bradley observes. Showed them they weren't alone. Sarah checks her rifle out of habit, though she hasn't fired a shot since the previous night. The shooting got their attention, she agrees, but it was the truth that really frightened them. Truth has a way of spreading that no amount of hired guns can stop. A wagon approaches. Martha Bradley leading a group of townswomen. They carry boxes of documents, evidence gathered over weeks of patient observation and careful planning. Judge Parker, Martha calls out, we found something interesting in the land office records. Seems the company's scheme went beyond just Thunder Valley. There's evidence of similar operations in every territory they touched. The judge examines the papers, his expression hardening. This is bigger than we thought. Miss Mitchell will Need your help coordinating with other communities. Your network of contacts. We'll be happy to assist. Sarah finishes. But not just me. Every woman who helped expose the truth, every person who refused to be intimidated. They're the real force behind this victory. She thinks of her grandfather's lessons about different kinds of strength. He taught her to shoot, yes, but more importantly, he taught her to see the power in unity, in standing together against those who would use fear as a weapon. The sun climbs higher over Thunder Valley, illuminating a changed landscape. The quiet ranch girl who hid her talents has transformed into something more, not just a skilled shooter, but a leader who showed others how to fight back against corruption. Sarah moves into her ranch house, now filled with activity as townspeople come and go, bringing reports and seeking guidance. Mrs. Henderson organizes a group of women at the kitchen table, mapping out similar company operations in neighboring territories. Reports from Fort Benton, she announces. 3 more investment companies using the same tactics. The Ladies' Aid Society there has already started gathering evidence. And this came from Helena, Martha adds, holding up a telegram. State Banking Commission wants to interview you, Sarah. Seems your evidence opened up a whole web of financial fraud. Sarah studies the map spread across her table, seeing patterns emerge. The company's operation in Thunder Valley wasn't unique. It was just one piece of a larger scheme to control entire territories through fear and manipulation. Miss Mitchell! Judge Parker calls from the doorway. Federal Marshal needs to speak with you. They're finding connections to railroad land grants, mining claims. The company was building more than just an empire, Sarah realizes. They were trying to control the whole territory's future, decide who gets to live here, who gets to prosper. Billy returns from another patrol, his young face serious. More riders coming in from the east, but not company men this time. Ranchers, farmers, townspeople. Word spreading about what happened here. They're looking for hope, Bradley observes, looking to see if it's really possible to fight back. Sarah touches her grandfather's rifle, remembering his lessons about responsibility. Then we'll show them how. Not just with guns, but with truth, with unity, with the strength that comes from standing together. The morning sun streams through her windows, illuminating the gathered evidence of corruption and the faces of people who refuse to be victims. Thunder Valley has become more than just a battlefield. It's become a symbol of resistance against those who would use power to prey on the weak. My grandfather used to say something about storms, Sarah tells the assembled group. Said the biggest ones start with a single change in the wind. What happened here, what we discovered and exposed, it's just the beginning. The quiet ranch. Girl who once hid her talents has found a different kind of target, one that can't be defeated with bullets alone. The real victory isn't just in exposing one company's corruption, but in showing others they don't have to face such battles alone. Thunder Valley stands as proof that when people unite, when they refuse to be isolated and intimidated, no amount of money or power can stand against the truth they reveal. 1 month after the fall of Western Territories investment, Sarah Mitchell stands on her porch watching riders approach from the east. Not company men this time, but representatives from other communities seeking guidance on fighting similar battles. The transformation of Thunder Valley is visible in more than just the absence of corrupt officials. New alliances have formed, crossing old boundaries of gender and status. The Ladies' Aid Society has evolved into an informal intelligence network spanning 3 territories, sharing information about suspicious land deals and coordinating resistance against corrupt enterprises. Another telegram from Judge Parker. Billy announces riding up. Now a full deputy, he carries himself with earned confidence. Federal investigation expanded to include 6 more investment companies. They're finding the same patterns everywhere. And our network? Sarah asks, checking her rifle out of habit though she rarely needs it now. Growing stronger every day. Mrs. Henderson's organizing ladies' groups as far as Dakota Territory. They're using your methods. Watching, gathering evidence, working together. Sarah enters her kitchen, now serving as an unofficial headquarters. Maps cover the walls, marking known corruption and emerging resistance. Mrs. Thompson sorts through correspondence from other communities, while Martha Bradley coordinates with their expanding network of allies. State Banking Commission approved. The new regulations, Martha reports. No more secret loan terms or sudden foreclosures. They're using our evidence as a template for reform. And this arrived from the territorial governor, Mrs. Henderson adds, holding up an official document. They're creating a special commission to investigate land fraud. Want you to serve as chief advisor, Sarah. Sarah studies the appointment. Letter, thinking of her grandfather's lessons about different kinds of battles. They're finally starting to understand. Real change doesn't come from the top down. It grows from people working together, refusing to be intimidated. A familiar whistle sounds. 3 short bursts followed by a long one. Sheriff Bradley enters, bringing news from town. Last of the company's local agents cleared out, he reports. Seems our reputation's spreading. Corrupt officials are finding Thunder Valley less hospitable these days. Because they can't operate in the shadows anymore, Sarah observes. Not when every shopkeeper, every ranch wife, every person they used to ignore is watching and sharing information. The afternoon sun streams through her windows as more riders approach. Farmers, ranchers, townspeople gathering for what's become a regular strategy session. The quiet ranch girl who once hid her talents has become something else. A leader who showed others how to transform isolation into strength. My grandfather used to say something about change, Sarah tells the assembled group. Said it's like breaking a wild horse. Looks impossible at first, but once you know the right approach, you discover the power was there all along. Just needed someone to believe it was possible. She moves to the fireplace, where her grandfather's rifle still hangs. No longer a secret weapon, but a symbol of what can be accomplished when people refuse to be afraid. Thunder Valley's victory wasn't just about exposing one company's corruption. It was about showing others that resistance is possible when people stand together. The company thought they could control these territories through fear, she continues. They never understood that fear only works when people feel alone. But once they start working together, sharing information, supporting each other, they discover they're stronger than any corrupt enterprise. Mrs. Henderson finishes proudly. Sarah nods, thinking of all the changes the past month has brought. The Ladies' Aid Society's transformation into a formidable network. The new alliances between communities, the growing confidence of people who once felt powerless. This is just the beginning, she tells them. What we started here, the methods, the networks, the courage to stand together, it's spreading faster than any company can stop. Through her window, she watches more riders approaching, bringing news of similar battles in other territories. The quiet ranch girl who once played at being the Thunder Valley Ghost has helped create something far more powerful. A movement that proves corruption can't survive in the light of united resistance. Thunder Valley stands as testament to this truth, its people forever changed by discovering their collective strength. And Sarah Mitchell, who once hid her talents behind a facade of simplicity, has found her true calling, not just as a legendary shot, but as someone who shows others how to fight back against those who would use power to prey on the weak. The sun sets over Thunder Valley, painting the sky in colors of promise. The company's shadow is gone, replaced by the strength of people who discovered that true power lies not in fear or force, but in the courage to stand together against injustice. As Sarah watches the gathering of determined faces, deputies, ranch wives, townspeople, all united in purpose, she knows her grandfather would be proud, not just of her shooting, but of how she used his lessons to show others that no corruption is too big to fight when people refuse to stand alone. The legend of Thunder Valley will spread, not just as a story of one woman's courage, but as proof that when people unite against injustice, no amount of money or power can stop the truth they reveal. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.